Good evening, everybody. I'm Todd Goldberg. I am the director of the Graduate School in Creative Writing and Writing for the Performing Arts at UCR. And I am joined here tonight by my dear friend and colleague, Emily Rapp-Black, also a professor of creative writing and writing for the performing arts at UCR. And we are here to talk tonight about the adaptation of Little Fires Everywhere, the fantastic novel by Celeste Ng that came out in 2017 and spent, 85 weeks on the bestseller list. My goodness, it was a huge hit. But before we get started, I want to make sure that we're aware of something, which is we are in the middle of a profound time of civil unrest in the United States. And tonight in particular, I know is a difficult night in the history of our country, and particular in the history of race relations in our country. The University of California, Riverside, and the University of California itself stands in solidarity against racial injustice, police brutality, and the lack of equity for people of all colors in this country. And we decided to go on with this event tonight, not merely because we're talking about a book that touched on all of these things, but also because literature is the engine of empathy. And we learn more about people who are different than us by reading than we often do just from talking to each other, because we're so reticent to talk to one another about the things that are hard. And so tonight we're going to have some hard conversations about the stuff that happens in this book and in this movie, or not movie, this TV show. And so I'm so appreciative of all of you coming here tonight on what I know is a difficult night, and on a night where you might otherwise be glued to the news to watch to see what's going to happen in the world. I hope that we can provide an hour of somewhat entertainment amongst each other to talk about this stuff. But UCR is dedicated to equality, and so we're going to talk about those things tonight as it relates to this book and this TV show. And there's no better person for me to talk about these things with than my dear friend Emily Rapp-Black. She is the author of two books that are out, Poster Child and The Still Point of the Turning World. Her brand new book, Sanctuary, comes out in January. She is a New York Times bestselling author, one of our most acclaimed voices in nonfiction, and also an expert in medical narratives, and just also top 5 coolest people in America. Ladies and gentlemen, Emily Rapp-Black.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emily, for joining me tonight. We got a lot of stuff to talk about.
We do.
We got a ton. So let's just dive right in. So the first thing is we should talk a little bit about the book. So Little Fires Everywhere came out in 2017. It is written by Celeste Ng. It's her second book. It was on the bestseller list for 48 consecutive weeks. Which means if we ever meet her in person, Emily, she's buying lunch.
Yeah, and
that's for sure, right?
Yeah, she's picking up.
She's buying lunch.
Yeah.
It received rave reviews all over the place, and it was optioned then by Kerry Washington, the fantastic actress Kerry Washington, and her production company. Now, for those of you who live in the Coachella Valley, here's your Coachella Valley intersection with this book and movie. Kerry Washington's production company is headed by Pilar Savone, and Pilar Savone is a 1989 graduate of Palm Springs High School, where she was the editor of the Palm Springs High School yearbook, along with
you,
Todd Goldberg, ladies and gentlemen.
What?
Basically, I wrote Little Fires Everywhere.
It's your show.
It's my show. But Pilar is a fantastic producer. And she brought the material to Kerry Washington, and then they adapted it along with Reese Witherspoon's company. So that's cool. The people involved in the adaptation are also a really interesting group of folks. So one of the co-executive producers of the adaptation is the fantastic novelist Attica Locke. So those of you who are in the Coachella Valley and regularly come to our Arts and Letters events, you'll remember meeting Attica Locke when she came out to talk about her novel just a couple years ago. Those of you who are in the MFA program at UCR, you met Attica's sister at our last residency, and the partners here at UCR got to meet her too, the fantastic actor and also author Tembi Locke. So Attica was one of the executive producers. She wrote one of the episodes. The show was primarily directed by a fantastic director, Lynn Shelton. And Lynn Shelton passed away, 3 months ago.
Oh, good.
Yeah, unfortunately. Fantastic director. Currently, the show is up for 5 Emmys, including Best Limited Series, Best Actress in a Limited Series for Kerry Washington, and Best Direction by Lynn Shelton. It also is up for a soundtrack and I think a costuming thing. Celeste Ng, just to go back to her for just a sec, grew up in Shaker Heights, the city where Little Fires Everywhere takes place. So she is a native of that area. She's 40 years old. So the 1990s in which the book takes place is about the time when she was growing up there, some 23 years ago. What else can I tell you that is important and salient to the adaptation? It was not shot, however, in Shaker Heights. It was shot in Pasadena. So,
of course it was.
Yes, standing in for Blue Blood Shaker Heights is Blue Blood Pasadena. But the show looked great. It has a great soundtrack, everything. So that's just some basic intel. It came out at the beginning of our vast global pandemic. At the end of March, beginning of April, yeah. Little Fires Everywhere came out. I gotta say, I hadn't read the reviews. Did you look at any of the reviews, Emily?
No.
They were not favorable.
Of course they weren't.
Why do you think that?
I never look at reviews.
Why don't you think they were favorable?
I don't know, because it's a woman-driven series, and people are upset about that. The male characters, we talked about this, are a little bit flat, which is what women usually are in TVs and movies. So I don't know. I think it's also like not an easy watch.
Right.
So I mean, it's not a Bruce Willis movie.
Yeah, I mean it's a really uncomfortable.
It's uncomfortable. Yeah.
Show, because
no one to side with. There's no one to side with, and I think people like to side with people. They want to.
I mean, it's a show without heroes.
Exactly.
It's a show where everyone has sort of a profound moral and emotional issue, and I think, it makes me wonder if the book had come out when we weren't, or I'm sorry, the television show had come out when we aren't all locked in our homes and filled with profound anxiety, if the reviews would be different.
I don't know.
The response from viewers is different than the reviews.
I thought it spoke really well to the things we're dealing with right now, some 20 years on, only in a different context. I mean, that's why I thought it was great, because it was like watching on the screen these things play out that we're watching play out in different ways now on the streets. And I think it's sort of sad, but also interesting to think about that these are still things that we're dealing with, and we haven't gotten any better at it.
Right. And the show itself does a very good job, I think, of digging in deeply to present day issues that the book sort of avoided. So the big change in the adaptation, I mean, there's a lot.
Yeah.
For those of you who read the book, you know most of the big ones. For those of you who have not read the book, you'll probably be surprised. So the biggest sort of fundamental change is that Mia and Pearl, in the book, their race is never discussed. So the divide between Mia and Pearl and Elena and her family is more about class than it is about race. However, and Maggie Downs, if you are poking around in the background here, if you can pull up this article, it'd be great. In an interview in The Atlantic, Celeste Ng said, I wanted Mia and Pearl to be people of color, but I didn't feel like I could write that. I didn't feel like I had the ability to voice that. And so she just made it nebulous. It's an interesting choice, of course, on her part. I think it's a great choice on the people adapting it. It absolutely makes it more rich, and allows for the issues that were happening in 1997 in the show to be far more applicable to present day. What did you make of that, Emily?
I agree. I mean, I thought that, well, first of all, the acting was so good that it seems like no one else could have played those roles in a sense. But I also think that in terms of the interface between Elena and Mia, that the race played a lot of role in their interaction. And I think that part of it was the emphasis on Elena's sort of civil rights background, her parents marched, and there's all this stuff about how she's sort of steeped in the ideology of particular freedoms. But when it comes right down to it, a couple of times she says, that's not for people like us.
Right.
So it kind of reveals this sham of sort of liberal acceptance,
Mm-hmm.
scratches at it. And I think that in some ways, if it hadn't been as much about race, it would have been a less interesting show.
Mm-hmm.
Just because I think those are the issues that are in our faces right now. And I mean, it was just like incredibly powerful to see that played out between these two women, and both of whom are flawed, both of whom are, love their kids. They want to do right. So it in some ways you root for everybody and you root for nobody.
Right.
And I think that's sometimes how we feel in these situations. Like, we don't know, there's no side, there's a system. Mm-hmm. So I think it's a show that speaks really powerfully to the way that systems bind us into particular roles.
And the issue of the mothers themselves, and obviously this is a show about mothers. It's a show about children and their relationship to their mothers in their relationship to other mothers, and also mothers in relationship to how they viewed motherhood in their sort of fantasy life, and then the reality of the situation. I grew up with a bad mother. I mean, that you can go read about that. Maggie, if you want to put some links to that down, feel free.
The good mother.
Yeah. So I grew up, with a mother that was undiagnosed bipolar, for sure. And so, part of my experiences watching this show were like, oh God, I'm having PTSD from this experience, where you have a mother who believes that she is perfect and doesn't sort of see the little fires that she's setting all over people's lives inside of it. And I found that a challenging thing to enjoy as entertainment, though of course I didn't enjoy it, because it forces you intellectually to look at all the relationships that you've had with your mother, right? And you, of course, as a mother, were you entertained by this, or did this cause you to be like, oh God, I gotta go have 57 gins and lay down?
57. I mean, I found it really intriguing because you can see what I thought was done really well in the show is that you can see every mother's perspective, especially when it comes to Mei Ling's fate.
Right.
The woman who's so desperately wants a child, and I feel that, like I can feel that, but I can also feel that that's my child, like the biological mother wants a child. I think, some of the most powerful scenes that I did actually enjoy, and I don't think I've ever seen anything quite like it on screen, are when Pearl and Mia are having really intense conversations, and Pearl will be screaming at her mother, and her mother's trying to sort of talk to her, and she's like, okay, and she gives her space.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that to me was like definitely how I feel like I interacted with my mother. Like she treated me as a person, and we would have these conversations, and she'd get pushy and then she'd back away. And I just thought I felt like her parenting was amazing. And she made mistakes, yes, but like she treated her child like a person and wanted to know what she thought and gave her space when she needed it. And then when they reconcile, it's just that much more powerful. And I don't think that, as a mother watching Elena mother, I was just like, why are you doing that? Like I felt empathy for her, but I was also like, they're not, I mean, I know so many parents, of course, I'm particularly annoyed by this, like live through their kids, or like their kids have to be these sort of icons of beauty and achievement and all of these things. And it's just ridiculous. It's like, it's like the parenting Olympics. And I feel like Mia never is even in that Olympics. She just wants her child.
Right.
And wants to do right by her, and she's constantly worried that she's not doing right by her. So as a mother, I was very moved by all of the storylines that involve moms.
See, I found myself really in touch with the moments where the parents were destroying items of their children's, throwing them.
Or cutting them out of pictures.
Oh my God. So in fact, it's somewhere on my shelf here. My mom wrote a memoir in 1981. It was a quasi memoir and divorce handbook called The Statue of Liberty is Cracking Up. And when she would get angry, she would come into your room and rip pages out of the book where she said nice things about you. And so I had this copy of my mom's book, and it's like a 300-page book, and it's missing like 80 pages because she would come in.
Are they all yours?
Yes. Anytime like a nice thing was said about her son, I'm going to rip that page out. I'm going to rip that page out. It was performative, obviously, But in the Mia and Pearl sections, when you're also dealing with an artist, which my mom was too, like all that stuff, like the hyper drama of it, that really hit home for me in an unpleasant, need to make a therapy appointment kind of way.
Well, I mean, it's interesting because I think, like you said, everyone has a mother, no matter what your relationship is with her.
Right.
But me, I mean, my mom is not an artist and doesn't smoke weed and doesn't.
Your mom's the best. Mom, if you're here, we love you.
Flour on make cities out of flour. But so she like her, and when Reese Witherspoon, like I love those '90s things like cardio, and then she's like has a little lunch bag, and then she like measuring her wine and like her outfits. My mom looked like that, but she was like the other mother.
Right.
So that was really interesting to me, like to see the outward and then sort of, because obviously my mother doesn't even know like any of the band names of the T-shirts that Kerry Washington wears. She's like, what is that? Like, why is she doing that? So that for me it was really weird personally, just to be like, oh my God, like my mom is like Elena on the outward, but inside she's like this like weed smoking artist in terms of the way she interacts with her children. So then I was terrified about like what my child will say about me. She'll probably be like, wow.
Well, if we're lucky, she'll come into frame.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, let's talk for a minute about the kids, and then we'll get into the plot in just a sec. I thought the kid actors specifically were remarkable.
They were.
I thought they were so good.
Every single.
The young woman who plays Pearl was just a force of nature, and so much emotion in every single scene that she played. And the kid who plays Izzy, oh my gosh, I would watch her in anything.
Oh, I would watch her in anything. I mean, she was fantastic, and like those moments where there's that moment when she's with her girlfriend at the party, and they're like in the closet, literally in the closet kissing, and the girlfriend like disavows her, and then she does it again.
Yes.
Like you can just feel it, and she just shows that so beautifully in her face and in her, like she's just like the most lovable kid. That's why it's just even more like ridiculous that Reese Witherspoon like doesn't like her.
Right.
She doesn't like her own child.
Oh God, and that moment, I mean, we're jumping ahead a little bit, but that moment where she says, I never wanted you, oh my God.
And the kids are like, what? Like they just can't even believe it.
It's one of those moments in television where you're like, oh, that's the Emmy she should be getting.
Yes.
I mean, it's so horrible.
So horrible. And it's like, I mean, I also feel like there's another moment that I felt was almost like couldn't watch it, was when she's trying to get Izzy to breastfeed and she won't eat. And then she goes on this whole thing where she's like, goes off to see her ex or whatever, but she has the money to buy the formula.
Right.
Even though she doesn't have the water to put in at the moment.
Right.
Whereas Mei Ling's mom also can't. And she's trying, and like, I don't want to talk about breastfeeding really, but like, I think it's, this is a thing that many mothers do and struggle with. And then that's when the class really comes through, because she had no resources. No one was going to help her. She couldn't afford it. They wouldn't give it to her. She was like 25 cents short.
Right. 70 cents.
70 cents.
Yeah.
So it's like, then you see like, oh, right. She didn't really have a choice. She was trying to make the best choice in that time period. And also, so was Elena.
Right.
She had more to access as a result of her color, her privilege, her class.
Right. Just to go back to the kids for 1 second. The other thing that I was most moved by with these young actors was their emotional vulnerability. They're given adult tasks in this show. And there was a moment where I really started to be surprised by it, which is when Lexi's boyfriend finds out that she has stolen Pearl's life for her entrance essay. And he turns to her, they're at the dance, and he turns to her and he says, you realize this is really fucked up. And you're like, oh my God, right. Like teenagers have adult ideas and aren't going to accept things easily. Yeah. And all of a sudden, every dynamic in the show with the kids after that conversation changes, because every single one of them after that point begins to use Pearl in a different way to get the things they want. Sometimes this is my black friend, check me out, I have one. And that's Elena's thing, basically. Like, she becomes Elena's black friend, even though she's the child and not the mother.
Yeah.
She becomes a status symbol. And all of a sudden, you begin to see the wreckage that these people are doing to Pearl, through their own selfish wants and needs. And it just starts to collapse. And it starts really about in episode 4, where the series changes, right? Like, the first 3 episodes, it's sort of a slow build. And I was having a conversation about this with my MFA students. The first 3 episodes of the show, I was like, oh, Reese Witherspoon is sort of playing the same role she's played a lot. It's the same role she was in Big Little Lies. I'm not really into it. Everyone's just sort of too perfect. And then it's like all the cracks start expanding. It's like when you don't fix the crack in your car window, you're like, it's tiny. And then one morning you walk out there and it's a spider web. That's what happens after episode 3 of Little Fires Everywhere. And the kids are the flashpoint.
They're the vehicle. They're the vehicle of all of the drama and the change, for sure. Yeah.
It's so cool and so well done. And the kids start to deal with the issues of race and class in Shaker Heights in a way that the adults never do. And I find that really sort of fascinating because of where those kids would be today. Those kids would be 23 years later, being the folks that are having these conversations in public right now,
Right. Yeah.
And that's why I think they made those choices in the adaptation to make it more about race and less about class.
Yeah, I agree. No, the kids were remarkably good. And I mean, especially just and also, I mean, it wasn't like maybe fun to watch, but some of the just like the mundane things about high school, like Moody likes her, but she
right.
And like the other one, and he's kind of a loser, but then he sort of is less of a loser at the end. Like, it's all of those things that are sort of like typical high school. It's like Beverly Hills 90210, but elevated somehow,
right.
Or something. I just dated myself, but but I also like that too. Just and also everyone has a lie, or a secret, and there's that moment when Mia calls the gallery woman. This is long before we know about the photo and like the whole of it. And the gallery director is like, what you can do. She's like, you are trapped by this secret. And I also think that's a turning point, because then we really, the moment of payoff when she calls the people who were supposed to be, Pearl's parents, that moment, I felt that, just this idea that she might lose her kid.
Right.
So everyone's in danger of losing their kids like all the time.
Right.
And so that to me was not maybe entertaining, but real.
Not in the least bit entertaining.
No, but it speaks to the truth about parenting, is that there's like no control really. Like,
well, and that's also the part of the of both the book and the show that are a little bit sort of soap opera-y. Like there's a big series of coincidences that have to happen in order for this thing to even work. And so, the mere idea that that Elena's friends adopted the child that was left at the fire station in Cleveland,
and then they
worked together. Mei Ling's child, and Mei Ling worked. It's so many dominoes that have been lined up, but like also Luke Skywalker's dad is Darth Vader.
Well, we were talking about this yesterday. It's like Dickens,
Right.
It's literally like in Charles Dickens, someone's like in a carriage in like the mud, and the carriage gets stuck, and they like look at the next person like, oh, you're here too? Whoa. It's like the plot is sort of built on coincidence, like remarkable coincidence.
Right.
Yeah, that's completely like, when Mia is in the with Mei Ling, and she's taking pictures of her, and then she's gonna go like prove that it's the child. You're like, what? But that would be completely a 19th century sort of,
right.
It's a very, I think, it's a very manipulative plot in that sense, that it's very much mechanical, and everything has a place, which I liked, actually. I mean, I haven't seen anything that's sort of that coincidental, that relies so much on coincidence in a long time, that wasn't like Days of Our Lives or something.
Right. Well, and they changed a bunch of stuff from the book to the show to make it a bit more coincidental, because of the need to have hooks at the end of each episode, basically.
Right.
So there are some big things that happen in the show that don't happen in the book exactly. Some of it's relationship based, some of it is physical action based, but all of it is to make it for a bigger cliffhanger. So
Right.
even like the issue of the picture that Mia sells, and how everyone finds out about it. In the show, they find out about it by seeing a huge article in the New York Times because it gets, it's bought for $400,000. In the book, they happen across the photo in a museum, which is an even bigger coincidence. So, like, pulling it out of the museum and putting it in the New York Times also serves to do a bigger thing, which is begin to show the influence of outside culture onto these relationships. The culture of 1997, where all of a sudden the media is going to play a role in all of this. The media is going to play a role in Mei-Ling's adoption. The media is going to play a role in the fires that are going to happen, in everything. Yeah. And so all of a sudden you have some third business, essentially, which is an outside force watching all of this and commenting. And in a way, it's somewhat related to how Celestine tells the story in the book, because she writes the book in an omniscient point of view, which allows sort of the Greek chorus to come through in the prose. And here in the show, 1997 becomes the Greek chorus. Like the culture itself starts to permeate. And, we were talking about this beforehand, but like 1997 was a weird time in the world. It was Clinton's second term. History had sort of paused.
Madonna's Ray of Light album came out.
Madonna's Ray of Light album came about. So she was all ropey and buff. 9/11 obviously hadn't happened yet. Columbine hadn't happened yet. All these sort of benchmarks were yet to come that would fundamentally alter culture and fundamentally alter the way all of these relationships that we see, the complexity of them, would be. And nothing larger than, of course, the larger acceptance of LGBTQ people. So here too, we have a relationship between two Black women in the 1980s, a lesbian relationship in the 1980s. And I should note, in the book, that's also not there. They added that in the movie, or in the TV show. And we're seeing the pebble of that in the 1980s hitting the shore in the 1990s, which is accurate for all things as it relates to LGBTQ.
Absolutely.
But I think in that way, like, 1997 ends up being a really sort of profound time to put this. What are your thoughts, Emily?
I mean, it's definitely like a middle space, right? I mean, I think in 1997, people still weren't as openly gay as high school students. It was still kind of taboo to talk about it. There had been no massive school shooting, so the problems of high school were very different than they are now, like the concerns of parents with their kids going to school, that kind of thing. And yeah, it was kind of like, I mean, it was just this kind of, I don't know, pause before the huge shitstorm that, ended up pulling us into, the later years of the 90s, or the later part of the decade, and into 2001. And I mean, it's so funny because I remember so vividly that time, obviously, because I'm like old and I was an adult, but I I remember 1997, like, that's why I remember the freaking Ray of Light film, CD coming out. And
she's in that denim jacket and she's dancing.
It's great. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I actually was living abroad then. And I mean, honestly, all I can think of is like Good Will Hunting, which is like feel good movies.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? And I also think that was, by that time, people had become more accepting in some sense of all different kinds of ways of living, somewhat. And I thought about that actually a lot, because in 1998, I was a chaplain. I know, don't fall down. At GLBTQ, at the time, it was just called Speak Out. It was like a speakers bureau in Boston and in Cambridge. And the goal of that organization was to go around to different places and have people tell their coming out stories, so that that people who were like homophobic buttheads would sort of see a person and like be like, oh wow, you have a story, you're a person, I understand you, which is what storytelling does, right? You learn someone's story, you don't want to kill them, right? It's just like that's what happens. You learn about them and you think, okay, you're less likely to do something awful to them. And you know, at that time, like, you know, in my chaplain role, you know, people would come in and it was hard. I mean, people were really struggling and were not openly sort of out, and had some pretty difficult experiences, like on public transportation if they were transgender, or in their families, really Catholic families. This is Boston, sort of a Catholic city. And I think about that now, and I think the conversations that organization is having now are so much different than they were in 1997, 1998, because we've come a long way. We haven't come far enough, but I think also it was just like remarkable to think about that, and that it was like a shameful thing that people would come in to talk about.
Right.
And the whole goal of the session was to be like, no, you know, be who you are, and like, here are the resources or whatever. Join our group, like come to these sessions with us, tell people who you are, find liberation in that. But that was something that was kind of novel at the time, and now it isn't so much, and that's good.
And I think too, 1997 and the way that they're using it in the show is also about the racial integration of the suburbs. And specifically a town like Shaker Heights, where they're using it as a master plan community, essentially, that would be open to all, but of course is filled with the same sort of profound racial injustice that any place is.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, what the screenwriters did really well, and which Celestine sort of danced around, was the issues of privilege and the issues of what it means to be a person of color in a hugely white place, and what it means for Pearl specifically, and the way that she's used by everybody. I thought that was particularly salient in the show, and it makes the ending when Mia makes the flower city of Shaker Heights all the more powerful. It's a beautiful image, but it's also about the image of the cages that people put themselves into, and the cages that you put others into. And I thought that was the benefit of being able to adapt this into 8 hours versus 2 hours. You know, this is the unusual thing I think now about books to film, is that it almost doesn't make sense with the format that we now have with streaming services, where you can get 8, 9, or 13 episodes or more, or less, rather 10, you know, of a great book. Like, why try and do that story in 2 hours when you can do it in 11, you know? And because it allowed the screenwriters to delve deeper into issues that Celestine just sort of walked around. Because the book really is more about the complexity of the relationships, which are huge, and obviously the show is too. But I think the show really forces the uncomfortable conversations that, you know, we have to have right now if we want to have what is commonly called a country. Please God.
I know. No, I think you're absolutely right. I think, you know, there was some like a remember a mini series where it was it was like the Civil War in 2 episodes.
The Blue and the Gray.
The Blue and the Gray. I love that. Still love that. You know, but it's true. Now we have this elongated sort of narrative where people can kind of, I don't know, dig their own graves in a sense. Like, one of the hardest things for me to watch was Elena just like, what are you doing? Like, every time she was trying to help, I was like, stop it! Like, you know, just like it's like a train wreck that you're watching, and she doesn't realize it, but you do as the sort of viewer. And I think that wouldn't have been as successful or as moving and sad.
Right.
If it had been 2 episodes. There's no space for that.
Yeah, they couldn't have done it, and you would have lost the opportunity to have that scene. And this is a scene again that doesn't exist in the book, just exists in the show, where Mia says to Elena, "You had choices. I didn't have choices." Yeah. Which is sort of a larger question of privilege in our society. It's not necessarily a question that people were saying in 1997, at least not outwardly as much as we're saying them today. But that scene between the two of them, that fight that they have, is really powerful, because I think it's a metaphor for something larger, as metaphors, I think by definition, have to be, right? So what did you make of that scene?
Oh, I love that. And I also felt like that scene, the sort of companion scene to that, is when Mia's on the stand in the sort of adoption trial, and she's petrified because she wants to help her friend get her daughter back, but she's also like doesn't want the fact that what happened with she and Pearl to be revealed. And she says every mother struggles. And at that point I was just like, whoa, like, you know, and I never cries, you know, and I felt so moved by that, because I think it's so true. It's like every mother struggles. And to me, that was sort of the unifying thing there, is that instead of helping one another, they were like ranking one another. And I think that still happens today. Like, and I just felt so, that was to me like one of the most powerful messages of that. It's just like, yeah, it depends on how many choices you have. If you don't have the extra 70 cents, if you have a husband with a job, if you have a house, if you have heat, if you aren't mourning the loss of your brother. So I don't know, I felt that was so, you know, especially I think in this culture, and I think this is very unique to sort of American culture, where we have these really rigid ideas of what a good mother is. That to me is really liberating, because I think, you know, it can be very terrifying to sort of think about, wow, am I being a good mother, right? I don't know if dads have the same issue, but I think a lot of moms are like, am I doing this right? Like, is this what I'm supposed to be doing? Am I messing up my child? I think every parent thinks that, but I think obviously mothers are, you know, it's just a different kind of relationship. It's not better, it's not worse, it's just different. And I liked that distinction, actually, because most of the men in the show are kind of like, whatever. Like they don't really have much of a role to play. Even in parenting, like Pacey or whomever. I mean, come on.
He has a name.
Josh Jackson, like he's so like, not until the very end does he even like have a personality. Right. Like it's just so flat.
Well, and that has to be by design, right? Like these are too good writers to make them flat, right? So every male character outside of the family, outside of the kids, is playing the role that I think men often write for women, which is just sort of like, I'm going to stand in the background and be handsome, be pacey, and be
mad that you went to dinner with like your ex-boyfriend,
right?
Well, you know, it's like, they're babies, kind of,
right? And then they also end up being wrong most of the time. So I mean, you know, most glaringly in the last episode when Linda's husband tells Linda, oh, don't let the baby be, it's fine. It's like, you're the only person who doesn't know.
Yeah, I know.
It's about to be stolen.
But also just that, like, we don't have a resolution to that scene, because obviously then you know, we see Mei Ling like with her biological mother in Niagara Falls, like
right.
But that
I think the supposition is they're running to Canada.
When Linda's like running through the hallway and she's bent over, she's gone. I was like, but then so I was like, oh no, bring her back. But then when I see her like the next the baby with her mother, there's no way to win. No. And I think that to me was one of the gifts of this show, is that when you're a parent, there's no winning. There's no war to win. There's no contest to win. There's no way to do it perfectly. And yet we still sort of have this Christmas card. Like the Christmas card scene for me was like, so Midwestern. It was just basically like, it just reminded me so much of, like, my parents never did that. Thank you. But like, that was definitely like, we'd get these cards with like matching outfits. And my dad would be like, is this creepy? And I'd be like, a little bit. Like, why are they all wearing the same color?
When Reese Witherspoon says, go upstairs and put on your fucking Keds, I was like, oh God.
and then she's like, I know. But then when she cuts her out of the picture,
I know.
Like, what are you doing?
Well, do you need to see the book where I'm ripped out of the book?
It's just like, I mean, I don't identify with that, but I also understand, like, when you get their backstories, you just like definitely have more empathy with them.
Right. For sure.
I love the way they do the backstory stuff. It's just so good.
Yeah, and I think every relationship in this is extraordinarily complex. I mean, that's the big takeaway I think from the show, is that there's not a single easy relationship with anyone in this. Not between the siblings, not between the parents, not parents to siblings, nothing. No one gets away unscathed, which is probably why the book's called Little Fires Everywhere. So let's talk a little bit about the ending. What time is it here? So we got a couple minutes, and then we'll turn over to you guys for your questions. So if you have questions, if you're getting them ready, you can put them in the chat, or put them up in the Q&A, and we're going to start taking them in just a sec. So the ending of the show, which of course just like the show Dark, which I'm obsessed by, the ending is the beginning. Oh, we should do Lit Binge on Dark. Try to do that.
It's like dark. I mean, it's just good.
It's just good. So the big difference between the book and the show is that in the book, Izzy sets all the fires, and then Izzy disappears. Mm-hmm. Dramatically, it makes a lot of sense for what the ending of the show is now. It doesn't quite make sort of logical sense that the kids be like, yeah, we should burn down the house. Like,
yeah.
Like, I understand it in the sense of we're watching a television show,
right?
And you can sort of have that moment where you all sort of look at each other and agree, like, yeah, we should probably burn down the house.
I know. Well, but I think though that the reason that is powerful is because it's a very Greek tragedy moment. Mm-hmm. Like Elena has her 100% fall.
Right.
Like all of her kids want to burn down her shit. Like
right.
Just like the worst nightmare. And she's screaming at them. She's like, I'm not perfect. And she's like, you are perfect. Like the whole idea is the facade that she has created is crumbling.
Right.
And I think it's powerful. And a lot of people live in a fantasy world like she does. And I really appreciated that, actually, that they were basically like, she was more concerned with the way things looked than how they felt.
Right. And so, for a television show, yes, like that's how you have to do it. You have to have all the kids being like, yeah, I'm going to burn down my room. I'm going to burn down.
Yeah. In a book. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So it makes perfect sense. And then you need a slight redemption in a television show. Like, you need a modicum of redemption. And that's why Elena says, I did it. Because, of course, she did do it.
She did.
She caused all of this to happen, even if she didn't do it physically.
Yeah.
And but then the crime writer in me is like, well, then they would arrest her for arson.
I know. But then when she goes to she sees the flower city and she sees the feather in the cage and she says Izzy for the first time instead of her name, she uses her nickname. That was also really powerful because you just, no mother wants to have her child hate her.
Right.
And she realizes that she's really messed up and that she may never get her child back. And that and it ends. I mean, I was just in pieces because it's just like, sometimes we do things and we don't understand the impact that they're having. And that's when I think sort of it's interesting that the male characters like Pacey / Joshua Jackson, he
Bill.
doesn't ever.
Character's name is Bill.
Bill, whatever. He's so like, his name's not Bill. It's not a Bill, but he's so like, he never steps in. He's so passive.
He runs away.
The thing that he's the most like upset about is that she had dinner with someone, but not that like she's, none of the other things that are actually really important that he could have called her out on. Right. So, I think it's sort of everybody sort of fails.
I did have a moment though when he gets the receipt faxed to him.
Yeah. Where
it's one of those old school credit card receipts. I was like, anyone under 40 watching this right now is like, what is that?
Why didn't he just send an email,
Yeah, I was like, oh God, I remember, like, you'd go with your credit card, or my mom would go, I was a kid, and they'd go through the book to look to see if your number was valid. How tough it was, or how easy it was to cheat on your spouse, my God.
Yeah.
I mean, so that's one last thing about 1997 is like, this book and this TV show doesn't work if you can track your children and track your spouse on their iPhones.
Yeah. Or like have an internet account that you use regularly.
Right. Exactly.
I mean, I think in college I had like one person I
emailed. It was all on AOL Digital City.
Yeah. Yeah, it's different now for sure.
So the ending, Elena gets her one little brief moment of redemption. She says, I burned it down. And then she drives over to Mia's place. And then we see Mia and Pearl going to Mia's mom's house. We see Izzy, presumably in a bus to a better life, to somewhere. A bus to become Mia, I mean, like, that's the easy mirror that they've built for you. And that's the other important thing, just when you're thinking about the show in general, is that every single character has a mirror to someone else in the story, be it in the present or in the past, which is a cool bit of storytelling, both on Celeste's part and on the showrunner's part. But it's a horribly unhappy ending. You know, there's not, you don't leave that and be like, well, I feel catharsis. You leave this and you're like, oh God, I need to go to therapy.
Although I think Mia and Pearl have a kind of, I think their ending is happy because it's honest.
Yes.
It's like, you know, there's agency in their decisions, and at this point, you know, Mia, or not Mia, but Elena, and there's no agency for her now. It's just like picking up the pieces. Whereas, you know, Pearl and Mia choose to leave. They put the key in the box and they leave, and her mother lets her decide where she wants to go. So I think a lot of that is just like allowing your children agency, which was Elena's fatal flaw. She didn't.
Right.
Because she never really got in touch with her own.
And I thought for sure that Mia was going to drive off when Pearl went inside the house. I think that was, I mean, obviously that's the tension in that scene.
Yeah.
And then she takes off her seatbelt and goes in. You know, which I thought was, I mean, that is the happy ending, right? Like that's the one happy ending in the story. Well, I really enjoyed watching the show and thinking about it, and also being really troubled about it. You know, being troubled about the way it made me feel, troubled about the way I was raised, and you know, the racism that I grew up around in a super liberal family. You know, I think that's the unique thing about this book and about this television show, is, you know, dealing with the sort of passive racism that a family of great privilege walks into, you know. And I don't always like being uncomfortable in my entertainment, but I liked it in this, and I liked that it asked the hard questions of the viewer, and of the actors and the writers too. Like, it's a really challenging piece of art.
It is. And I think, and in terms of just a comment on that, like when she makes the flower city of it, what she's showing there is the system. Like it's the system. It's almost like not even unique to a particular human being. It's just that we live in this racist system and everybody's trapped.
Right.
And I thought that was like a very sort of our time thing. It's like, you can't go around saying I'm not a racist because you live in a racist system.
Right. You're part of it. You're inside
part of it. You benefit from it. It's systemic. It's not personal.
Right.
So the point is to sort of look at the system and change the system. And I think so often people are so desperate to sort of get their street cred, you know, as like not a racist, which is what Elena's fatal flaw is. Like she is, because she's in a system that's racist and she won't acknowledge that.
Right. Well, I'm sure you all have questions, so we're going to bring on Agam Patel. Agam, show yourself. There he is.
There he is.
Hi, Agam.
Nice to see so many familiar faces in the audience. Emily, thank you so much for being with us again. I guess I'll get started with the questions coming in on our chat feed. And here's the first one. Izzy develops a relationship with Mia, and Mia allows her into the world of art in a way that she never did with Pearl. It was interesting to me that Pearl never challenged Mia on her behavior. What do you think?
Interesting. What do you think, Emily?
Well, again, we have the mirroring, right? Because Elena is giving to Pearl this kind of like touchy-feely kind of welcoming thing that she really wants, right? And Izzy's getting this kind of artistic sensibility and possibility of a life from Mia. I think it's so much easier to be generous with someone that you're not related to sometimes than it is your own flesh and blood. It's just harder. It's harder to, when you're intimate with someone, the stakes are so much higher that it makes complete sense to me that the relationships that they had with other kids were easier. I think that's actually true for a lot of people. I mean, I don't know, like I think about my grandmother, who was horrifying to me, but everyone thought she was great, right? She was so nice to everyone else, but to me, she was a nightmare. So it's like, I think that makes actually it's human nature. I think the stakes are lower when it's not your flesh and blood. Yeah.
Right.
That's
yeah. And then, of course, it's flipped when Mia has that conversation with Lexi after Lexi has her abortion. And Lexi's sitting there in her house and, you know, drinking her tea or whatever, and you're expecting Mia to be just completely kind and welcoming to everything, and she basically is like, you are a user and you should wash your own damn cup for the first time.
Exactly.
And you realize, like, oh, so like it's a proxy conversation, right? It's a proxy conversation for the one she's going to have later with Elena.
Yeah.
But it's exactly to your point though about the mirroring of those relationships. Yeah, absolutely.
And also that scene when Izzy comes in and Mei Ling's mom is like on the floor.
Right.
And, I could hardly watch that. And she just puts herself on her back.
Powerful. Yeah.
And she just sees the hurt in another person. And it's like, she doesn't even know what's happening. And she just goes for her. Like, I think there's all kinds of those moments too that balance these other, I don't know. I just find that's just very human.
Yeah, and that moment where Izzy, you know, crawls on top of Mei Ling and hugs her, or not Mei Ling, Bibi. You know, I was like, wait, do they know each other? Have they even met? And then it occurred to me, like, they've never had a scene together in this before. It's the most sort of human empathy moment that exists. I see someone hurt, I'm going to hug them. Yeah. And it's, you know, it's also the thing that I sort of miss about the vast global pandemic. Like, you can't comfort anyone other than the people that, you know, I can comfort my wife, but there's no one else that I'm touching, you know, no one else that I can give that to.
No, I mean, I remember being at a ceremony for celebration in the community that I'm in with women who've lost their children, and one of the moms started just, like, you know, wailing in this very, like, deep way, and when we didn't really know her, but everyone just started wanting, like, just kind of pile on of her, because it was just, you see this suffering and you want to say, like, I'm here, I can't but I'm here. And I thought that was so beautiful. I just, you know, it's so beautiful that it made me, like, not want to look at it.
Yeah, it was really uncomfortable. I agree. Okay, good question. What else? What's the next one?
Yeah.
All right. I think you covered this a little bit, but why did Celeste Ng choose to set the story in the year that she did?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think it's obvious because of the sort of point in American history. But I mean, also just as a writer, I think, as Emily and I can just sort of both attest to, like, you know, she wanted to write about people of a certain age, so she was that age in that year, so she wrote it in that year.
Yeah, I agree.
So I think that's part of it, you know, but it's intentional, you know, to choose that time period, and you see it in the book not as much as you do in the show about, you know, what the social mores were of the time. And so I think also setting it in 1997 allows for her to comment on present day without commenting on present day.
Right.
And that's just sort of part and parcel what Emily and I both do, both in fiction and nonfiction, is like use something from the past to hang a lantern over the present.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's why the show's so successful, because it's doing that. But then also you get to have, you know, like all your good favorite songs. So that's
and all the bad fashion, like
all the bad fashion.
Why?
So much bad. So much Alanis.
Where?
So much Alanis Morissette songs. Yeah, so many.
That Bob, like Bob, and the no.
There's a great moment though in the first episode when Izzy has fucked up her hair, and Reese Witherspoon's character says, "Oh, we'll just give you the Rachel, and that will solve everything."
Oh yes. Like,
which is the Jennifer Aniston haircut from Friends that everyone had in that era, and like that was the thing that I think people did to feel better. Like, well, I can look like Jennifer Aniston.
Yeah.
I'll be fine after that. So much Chumbawamba, Maggie Downs is saying that's true. I get knocked down, but I get up again. All right, what's next to go?
All right, what are your thoughts about dealing with so many issues in one book or one series?
Well, I think you have to if you're writing literary fiction. You know, if you're going to write about a family at a fracture point in America, if you only write about the systemic issues inside their house, you're never going to reach a level of empathy with the readers that you need, because it becomes like reading an Updike novel now. Like you read an Updike novel now, it's just like, oh, I'm sorry that you're having a problem, drink less, and it just doesn't it just doesn't it's true, it just doesn't have that wider appeal. And so I think you have to artistically deal with these issues. Now, that being said, Celeste didn't write about the racial issues. She moved that to class. Mm-hmm. The space of the television show, I think, allowed for race and class. I think if you're doing both of those things in that book, it might be a little bit more difficult, but I don't know. I mean, I think the subplot with the Chinese baby being adopted by a white family, of course, is a class issue too. But I think you got it. I mean, in my fiction, I try to cover, wide swaths of culture, and I just write crime fiction, but I'm also trying to talk about the government and religion and family problems and the economy, all these things, so that it's believable. And in your nonfiction, surely you do the same thing, Emily.
Oh, I try. Like I think the complexity. I honestly think like sometimes the complexity of something isn't totally available to the writer when he or she or them are writing it. I think it's just a thing that you do, and then people are like, "Oh, you did this," and you're like, "Okay." I think it's about storytelling, right? Mm-hmm. So, first and foremost, the characters have to be deep. There has to be a plot. It has to be propulsive. It has to be immersive. Like all of those things, I think, lend themselves to various interpretations of all kinds of issues that the writer may never have intended.
Right.
That's kind of the beauty of it, right?
And I think too, for a TV show, like the arrows that Emily and I have in our quiver is human thought. The complexity of a character can just be conveyed through the complexity of their logic, and that's enough for a reader most of the time. Well, you don't have that in a TV show or a movie. You have to have some other external force. Yeah. And so that external force more realistically is going to be some of these culture war stuff, because it walks into your house by virtue of the world that we're living in at that time. And that's remember what I was talking about earlier about the role that the media plays in the TV show versus in the book. Mm-hmm. And that essentially is the narrative voice seeping in, like, hey, there's something larger at work going on right now.
Yes.
And it's Elena's boyfriend's going to go to the Middle East to cover, or ex-boyfriend's go to the Middle East and cover foreign affairs. Well, what he doesn't know is he's about to be thrust into the darkest time in American history. There's so much.
Yeah, he's so cool to her.
Right.
And rightfully so in some ways, but also just like, he's like, I'm living the dream later, and it's just like, oh, okay, later. See ya.
But he is awfully attractive.
Oh, yeah. he was, he was a good choice.
He was a good casting choice. All right, what else you got?
All right, have the number of pockets of privilege increased or decreased in America since 1997?
Pockets of privilege. That's a hard one to say.
I think it depends on where you're speaking from. I think yes and no. I think everyone has a different experience of that. And certainly in the last 4 years, I think that's shifted, obviously, because we have a person who, anyway, I won't say any more about that. But I think it's in the last 4 years, those pockets have become more evident. I'll say that.
Well, and I think too that the conversation around what privilege means, obviously, is more prevalent today than it was in 1997. These weren't conversations that were happening in classrooms even. I was teaching in was I teaching in 1997? No, I guess I was teaching in 2000. But I had graduated college in 1994. And these weren't conversations we were having in the college classroom. And I went to college in California. The sort of issues of multiculturalism were talked about a bit, but not much. Not to a great extent. So I would say that they've probably, I don't know, I guess they've probably increased, but it might just be awareness. Like this is something I think about a lot as it relates to something completely unrelated. Well, somewhat related to this, like murder and child abductions and all this other stuff. Is it increasing, or is it increasing because we are finding out about it more? The crime rates have actually gone down, but how much stuff was hidden. Like, we don't know about all the horrible things that people weren't reporting, you know, rapes and sexual assaults and all that stuff, you know. And so I think things show up in the light the longer that we put the light on them, obviously.
Yeah, no, I think that's true.
It's a good question, though.
It's a good question. And I mean, I think really the goal, and this is probably what the person is asking, is just recognize where your pockets are and like, do stuff that is helpful to other people who aren't in the pocket. Right. Like, you know, like open the pocket and just do, or try to reduce them. I think there's only so much you can do, but I think, you know, we've come to a point where, you know, we have to sort of acknowledge our positionality in a way that we haven't before, and it's uncomfortable, but it's also good. You know, instead of being like, I think the late 90s was this kind of like, I mean, I don't know, I was working in relief work, so it was basically like, it was like, we're all one under God or something like that. But I mean, at the same time, that wasn't actually true. I mean, when you're a relief worker, you're in a community and you're helping. So there's also this kind of top down, like, you know, we're helping because you need it. And I think that was shifting at that time. Actually, there was this whole idea, like, we're not helping these people, we're like accompanying people. And those were conversations that were hotly debated, believe it or not, in really boring staff meetings.
In 1997, I was writing infomercials for a living. So what I can tell you is that in the infomercial world, in the George Foreman grill world.
Oh my God. I still have that one. I still have a George Foreman grill.
Hey, look, if you want a panini, there's no better way to make a panini.
Dude, the fat goes out of the chicken.
Well, we have time for one more question. Agam, make it a good one.
All right. Which version did you find more successful, the book or the TV series?
Ooh. Well, let's see. Check the participants. Is Celeste Ng among the participants?
Not today.
Okay. I thought the TV show was better. I thought it was more complex. I think I can watch Kerry Washington and Reese Witherspoon scream at each other all day, every day for the rest. Like, just so good. And, you know, like I said before, like the first 3 episodes, I wasn't sure I was in. And then episodes 4 through 8, I was like,
yeah. And
so I found it extraordinarily compelling in that regard. What about you, Emily?
I agree. I mean, there's that scene where Elena goes to Mia's house and she's like accusing Pearl of having an abortion when really it was her own daughter. And she you can see that they want to like support each other.
Right.
They cannot do it. Like, I want you out by morning. Fine. Like, it's just so like, there's so much emotion in that scene. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think it'd be hard. It's hard on the page, I think, to do that. And I definitely feel like the series was much more.
And also just the look on Kerry Washington's face, because she knows the truth. Like, that's such a great moment. Like, she's has the sad face. And then when she realizes that Reese Witherspoon does not know the truth, and like, she doesn't want to smile and be like, you moron, you don't know. But there's like, if you go back and look at the scene, and I tell you, all of you go back and look at it on Hulu, there's a moment where it's almost a smile pops up, and then she tells her the truth.
And then also that bathroom scene, the mirror scene of that.
Yes.
In the courtroom, and Reese is like, I'm just really surprised that you did that, given that, and all of a sudden Kerry Washington realizes she knows.
Right.
She was like, what? Like, I mean, it just like, you know.
Yeah. There's a lot of those great moments. And I mean, you know, these sort of two-handed moments where it's just them. Yeah. I mean, 2 great actresses, right? With really good words written for them. And you've now spent a week or however long you've binged it for with these people. So you know them pretty intimately. And you think you know how that scene's going to go. And your allegiance is like, you don't know who you're rooting for. So it goes really back and forth.
Allegiance. It messes with, because you can be allied with anybody, really.
Right. Yeah, and that's why I think I prefer the show, because of the emotional experience that I had watching it. And I was thinking about them, like I'd be in the shower wondering what they were doing.
Yeah, it's visual. Know? It's like you want to just like jump through the screen and be like, what are you doing? You know, I mean,
what's wrong with you?
Yeah, or just like,
just be cool.
Yeah. Stop doing that.
Stop doing that. Also, everyone would solve their problems if everyone just said, here's everything I've done in my life. What have you done in your life?
I know. yeah, and just like, let's just all just be okay with it.
If someone eventually just had an intervention where they just sat everyone down and said, tell us what you did from 18 until this moment, all of their problems would be solved.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest failing of everybody in that series was an inability to empathize fully.
Right. And to tell the truth.
And to tell the truth.
You know? Well, Emily Rapp-Black, thank you so much for joining me for this discussion. It's always a good time sitting here and chatting with you. Emily Rapp-Black's next book, Sanctuary, which you're going to want to buy, comes out in January. My next book, which you should buy 2 copies of, The Low Desert, comes out in February. And we're going to do this again next month. We're going to watch The Watchmen, which is on HBO. I don't know who's going to be joining me yet. There will be someone deeply invested in comics. Will be sitting here and talking to me about The Watchmen. Thank you all for coming so much. We really appreciate it. Stay safe out there. Wear a mask. Bye, everybody.